Good morning, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for May 17th, 2020, recorded around 8:40 in the morning Eastern Time. Well, Tropical Storm Arthur has formed in the Atlantic Basin, and as such, this will probably get pretty close to the North Carolina Outer Banks, and as such, a tropical storm warning has been issued for portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks at this point in time, as Arthur is expected to make a pretty close track to or right over portions of the Outer Banks. Again, this is the National Hurricane Center track forecast showing that there is expected to be a turn off towards the north and east here over the next coming days, and then eventually turning directly east over the next few days. But this still allows for some wiggle room for it to get closer to portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks, and as such, a tropical storm warning has been issued for those areas. The storm is moving north-northeast at about 15 miles an hour right now and is only about 40 miles per hour and 1,002 millibars. The storm is beginning to undergo a little bit of strengthening, but is going to be hindered significantly over the next few days. We'll get to that here in just a second. The projected forecast calls for this to be about 60 miles per hour right before it transitions into a post-tropical cyclone, and by hour 120 this is expected to be dissipated. But over the next couple of hours, this is expected to remain a fairly minimal tropical storm, only strengthening within the next 24 hours to about 45 miles per hour before it starts to undergo an extratropical transition. The recon plane that is in there this morning did find pressures a little bit lower at 1,002 millibars, a closed low-level center of circulation, and some stronger flight level winds on the eastern side of it. This has more of a subtropical than a tropical look in nature, but again, this is still designated a fully tropical system with a warm core at this point in time. But again, the highest winds right now are on the eastern side of it. And if we take a look here at the actual recon data, this is from tropicaltidbits.com, you do notice that most of our flight level winds have remained just about at tropical storm force, now getting in some of the flight level winds of over 45 knots, which roughly equates to about 50 miles per hour. But the surface, the step frequency microwave radiometer, that's a hard thing to say, those SFMR readings coming off the aircraft looking at the surface winds have only been about 30 to 40 knots, so certainly a little bit lower than our flight level winds, but that is to be expected at this point. If we take a look here at the satellite data, this is from COD Meteorology, you do notice that our little swirl of circulation is right here. It is exposed, and there is a lot of dry air coming in on the back side. You do notice all of this stable air over here, because the cyclone is turning in a counterclockwise circulation. What that's doing is that's even pulling in some of this drier air into the cyclone. You do notice that some of that dry air is being radiated in and really exposing our low-level center today. And if we jump to the mid-level water vapor image here from COD Meteorology as well, you do notice that there is a ton of drier air out towards the west of the system, and that is part of the reason why we have an exposed low-level center of circulation at this point in time. If we also take a look here, this is the wind shear. This is from the Central University of Wisconsin-Madison site. Our wind shear has let up over the system over the past couple of hours, and we've started to see a little bit more in the way of convection trying to build around the center. But again, one of the main problems currently is all this dry air, but you do notice the convective bursts that are flaring just to the east of the system that will probably try to get wrapped in around the center of circulation later today. So again, the recon plane that is in there currently has found pressures of about 1,002 millibars and some flight level winds approaching about 50 miles per hour. If you take a look here, this is the 850 millibar vorticity. The higher you go up in the scale, the higher cyclonic turning you're getting in the atmosphere, and the higher spin you're getting. And you do notice this is our system right here located off the Florida East Coast. Again, over the next coming days, this is expected to take more of a track off towards the north-northeast and eventually out towards the north and east. Now again, just how close this gets to portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks is still yet to be determined. But you can definitely see there is a lot of cyclonic shear, but there is still this little itty-bitty warm front that's draped to the north of here. And what that's going to do is still impinge a little bit of shear across this area. And if we go back to some of the wind shear here, you do notice that the wind shear values are a little bit higher than initially thought across this region. There is going to be right now at the base of this upper trough here, it's at its axis, which means there's not a lot of shear across the region. But as we progress over for the next couple of days, all of this shear that's located out here in response to another trough of low pressure is going to actually start impinging a little bit more shear across this region. And as such, the National Hurricane Center really isn't forecasting much significant intensification, only up to about 60 miles per hour right before it turns post-tropical. So again, this is not expected to be a hurricane, but it is expected to be a modest to strong tropical storm by the time it does get to portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks. Again, just how close it gets to those areas are yet to be determined, and the latest track forecast coming from tropicaltidbits.com, this is the spaghetti plots. Most of the track guidance has actually shifted a little bit further east today. Again, this is now hour 24, so it has started to slow down just a tad bit as well. We're seeing movement right now north-northeast at 15, but it is expected to slow down rapidly over the next while. So again, we are starting to see more of a transition to what could be a subtropical type look and post-tropical look already. But again, over the next 24 to 48 hours, it's going to be making its closest approach to portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks. Again, it is expected to slow down significantly here over the next coming hours, and that could allow it, as it moves into the Gulf Stream, to fire some pretty deep convection across the center, but there is still going to be some increasing shear across the region. But by generally hour 48, this is just near or north of the North Carolina Outer Banks at this point. And again, the official forecast from the NHC does closely follow a blend. Only really the HWRF and the GFS model are the furthest west. Most of the other models show a bend back off towards the east and almost actually do a little bit southeast there. So again, interest in Bermuda still had to be paying attention to this system, but again, it should be weakening by the time it gets to hour 96. So certainly something to kind of keep in mind there. This is the latest intensity guidance. Actually, the 12Z guidance has just come in, so we'll update that. There we go. So taking a real quick look at the 12Z guidances, again, still pretty much the same thing here. About 24 hours from now, this is expected to be making its closest approach to portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks by 24 and 48 hours from now. And then by the time we get to anywhere from about 48 to 72 hours, this is expected to be making an approach that turns away from the United States mainland. The intensity guidance track right now for 12Z continues to suggest a tight envelope up to a strong tropical storm right before it turns out to be a post-tropical system. So again, we could be seeing maximum winds of anywhere between 55 and 60 miles per hour. Really not likely to see anything in the hurricane category because this is just not going to be that time of the year quite yet. But again, for the most part, this should peak at about 50 to 60 miles per hour according to the latest guidance data. Now, if we take a look here at the GFS forecast, this is the 6Z run valid as of today. And if we just move to the 850 millibar vorticity, you do notice by 18 hours, here is our system right here. Now, again, it's not very tight on the GFS forecast, but again, this is our next trough of low pressure here moving into portions of the southeastern United States. Now, again, right now, this is not impinging any shear on the system, but as we go with time and as we move forward, what's going to happen is that this is going to start to break down and actually separate off into two low pressure systems. There's a cutoff low here and another trough of low pressure here. Both of these are moving generally in the same direction, however, and should start to impinge some shear on the system by hour 30. Now, the GFS forecast calls for, again, the storm to move right near or over the North Carolina Outer Banks over the next coming days. But again, there's going to be a lot of shear on the system. If we take a look here at the 250 millibar winds, we'll take a look at the 250 millibar winds. You do notice that here is our base of our trough right here, but you do notice that some of the winds are now coming out of the southwesterly direction there. And what that's going to do is be impinging some shear on the system. If we move back just a couple of forecasts prior, you do notice that there was expected to be a little less shear across this area. That's the less shear, but not as strong as the system now. So again, this is still going to be in an area of relatively light shear, but anywhere between 15 to 20 knots of shear is going to be impinging across the system at that time. Now, if you take a look here at the H wharf and we take a look here at the 700 to 400 millibar relative humidity, you do notice all of this area of drier air. This is what we're looking at on the water vapor satellite, that we do have a lot of dry air across this region, and that is trying to get wrapped in behind the center of the storm. And if we take a look here at the H wharf model, we'll scoot it out here about 12 hours. You do notice that this is trying to get wrapped around into the system. Now, most of this is weighted off towards the east, and if we take a look again at the satellite for this morning, you do notice that a lot of this is heavily weighted off to the eastern side here, and this is our center of center of circulation right there. So certainly an exposed low-level center at this point in time. But the H wharf actually continues to have some relative dry air entrainment across the system even through hour 21, and again, there's going to be a little bit of higher shear values across this region that might be able to actually push in a lot of this drier air across portions of the region. So again, it's going to be interesting to see just how this actually develops. But the H wharf model continues to deepen the system, but now is starting to undergo a post-tropical look. This drier air is actually getting circulated into portions of our low-level center at this point. And given our current trends, it wouldn't surprise me at all if this was still an exposed low-level center at this point in time. And the H wharf continues to make landfall here in the Outer Banks, but again, it could be anywhere from just offshore to just onshore of the North Carolina Outer Banks. And the HMON model, the Harmon, is pretty much almost the same here with 995, but again, this is starting to undergo some post-tropical characteristics at this point in time. A quick look at the radar here, you can just see the outer bands of Tropical Storm Arthur now, but again, this is pretty far off, so we really won't be able to see anything till it makes its probable closest approach to portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks. Again, right now we are still watching recon heading in. Again, they'll do another pass here in just a little bit, but for the most part, again, Tropical Storm Arthur is still having a tough time strengthening this morning, and Arthur is likely to remain a weak, disorganized, lopsided system at least for the next several hours here, and probably for the rest of its lifetime, especially if this convection is still getting sheared off and this drier air is still getting impinged down in, through, and around the system. So again, the main story is that Arthur remains a weak tropical storm at only 40 miles per hour, but could make a pretty close approach to portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks on Monday, and for that reason a tropical storm warning has been issued for portions of the North Carolina Outer Banks. Stay tuned to your local National Weather Service forecast offices for the latest information. I hope you all have a good morning, and I will see you guys later this afternoon.